Rainbow flags are waving outside the Supreme Court right now as we speak. Big party atmosphere going on there as the supporters of same-sex marriage cheering the decision that came down from the Supreme Court that obviously decided a long time ago, but these announcements don't come until late June. We'll be talking a bit about that this morning, of course. Also, we've got an update on the Patriots night, July 2nd, coming up in Twin Falls. That's less than a week away now. It's next Thursday night. And there are still tickets available, how you might be able to get those tickets as well. And also, there's a mural in Boise that has people upset. I guess you could call it our own Confederate flag controversy going on here. It's akin to that, very much so. And there have been terrorist attacks, apparently, during our overnight hours, not only in France, but in Tunisia, and as well as Kuwait. So it looks like there is an effort going on there, organized effort around the world to spread terror. I was going to open up with that and have a discussion about that this morning, but with the announcement coming down so quickly on same-sex marriage from the Supreme Court, I think perhaps we're going to shift things around here just slightly, ever so slightly. Bill Colley with you this morning. It's 8:08:70. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. And obviously, I'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts are on this ruling from the Supreme Court of the United States this morning. It clears the way for same-sex marriage in all 50 states. I mean, immediately. Any state that is in the way now will be in violation of the federal government, and the government said that there is no way that you can do this constitutionally. This is a protected right, that according to the majority of the Supreme Court. And so, therefore, a state that would get in the way would find itself in some serious trouble. And you could be looking at certain federal money withheld. You could be looking at certain efforts by the federal government to replace certain state officials. And I don't know if anyone is willing to defy the federal government to that degree. Our telephone number is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. And my email address, I'll try to get to my email this morning. A couple of hiccups with the computer today as far as the internet goes. But my email address is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. While I was a little surprised, not wholly, but a little surprised by the ruling on Obamacare yesterday, this ruling today does not surprise me whatsoever. And a few reasons why. The Constitution doesn't say anything about marriage. And in fact, it's always been considered, even though the government, makes you license, you got to go down and get a license and do all of that. I mean, you could go to a church, I suppose, and you could get a marriage, and you don't necessarily, I would imagine, have to license it with the government, but then you would not get certain tax benefits and other benefits later on in life, the retirement benefits that you would share with a spouse if you didn't go down and get a marriage license. But there's nothing in the Constitution that speaks to marriage, nothing whatsoever. The framers didn't even think about that as a big issue, because in their time, the only people who were getting married in churches, and they were men and women. And the government at the time didn't license and permit every activity that we did. So therefore, and all along I've been saying this, the word marriage is just, that's all it is. It's a word. All along, if 10 years ago you had been walking down the street, pick any local community, Twin Falls, Filer, Kimberly, well, maybe Haley or Bellevue, and someone had encountered you had encountered two men or two women, and they had told you we're married, you could not have them arrested for making the claim. And they may have been married by a clergyman who was sympathetic, but that still wasn't going to be against the law. It just wasn't going to be recognized in most places around the country by governments, simply put that way. And so all we've done, it's semantics, that's what it is. And we've been arguing over just that definition for years and years and years, and there's no way the court was going to wade into the definition. The court was just going to look at the Constitution and say, there's nothing in here about this. In fact, we talk a lot about the 10th Amendment, which said that, the powers that were not set for the federal government were reserved for the states. Well, the 9th Amendment says essentially that the federal government and the states, if they did not set aside or mention anything about this, the 9th Amendment says, go ahead. It says it's your right. Now, a lot of those earlier amendments than the Bill of Rights were superseded by what they call the middle three that were passed after the Civil War. That would be the 13th, 14th, and 15th, and that gave the federal government much more control in imposing its will upon the states. We no longer really have 50 states. It's really akin to 50 provinces because of the strong central control from Washington. Now, all of this said, here's my concern. And again, you could not arrest, well, in Texas, they were still arresting men who were living together, supposedly for having sexual relations right up until the mid-1990s. And if they hadn't been doing that, perhaps none of these cases we wouldn't be talking about it today. But because it was so blatant to barge into somebody's house and say, you two men need to stop doing that, and you're under arrest, if they had just ignored people with what they were doing in their own homes, then the other side might not have been so militant about this, and we might not be having this conversation today. This whole notion of same-sex rights and marriage may have never even come along. But it was because in certain parts of the country, government felt its duty was to go out and tell people you can't be doing this, even though you're two consenting adults. And in the United States, the governments are supposed to be, we may have a Judeo-Christian foundation, but it's not the church running the show. It's the government is supposed to be above that or below it. Maybe that's a better description. But the fact of the matter is, if that heavy-handed treatment of various people in those situations may have created a backlash where people said, you know what, we're going to start fighting these things in courts. And they did. And within just a few short years, the Texas law on sodomy was struck down. And everything else has just flowed from that. So it was that call it brutish behavior that you might see in a place like Iran, where they would barge into, well, of course, if they did that, they'd barge into a room and drag you away, and they'd kill you. Oh, we didn't go quite that far in this country. The thing we have to do now, if you are a person who still believes in, from your own religious perspective, and most people listening to the sound of my voice today are likely still Christians, at least nominally. And if you believe, because, you know, Jesus always spoke about the union of a man and a woman. He spoke of nothing else. If you are a Christian and then you believe that this runs counter to everything you have been taught, and that if you were to comply, you were to be forced to comply, then obviously we need protections, not only for our churches, but for the consciences of people who don't wish to do business with someone because they're worried that they're going to imperil their own soul, which Libby can't understand because over on the American left, they simply don't really believe in God. They think we're all just superstitious fools. And so we're just being mean when we will not conform and won't bake them a cake or take their pictures at their ceremony, or we won't cater the event. The point I'm trying to make today is that there is an ignorance on the American left of the depth of feeling a great many Christians have. And if you violate your conscience and the teachings of your church, those things you have learned since you were often in the cradle, then your concern is you may go to hell. You're not judging anyone else. All you're saying is, I have a problem with doing this myself, and I feel if I have to bake someone a cake. Remember the movie The Ten Commandments? It was a great production. I don't know how biblical. I mean, it certainly was somewhat, but there are moments where some of the people are forced to do things they don't want to do, such as fashioning a golden calf. That's a violation of your conscience, because you're not supposed to have any other idols before God. And so you understand my point here. Or if you ever saw the play or movie A Man for All Seasons, based on the life of Thomas More, who Winston Churchill once said was the greatest Englishman who ever lived. High praise if it's coming from Churchill. And More, and the trial transcript is actually used in the play and the movie. So a lot of it is obviously just we had to fill in the blanks, and it's an account that you'd have to say when you're trying to do something 400 years later as far as writing about someone's life. You have to fill in the blanks here and there. But the trial transcripts do exist. And there, at one point he's being questioned by some friends about why he won't go along with the king's divorce. Because the king is, going up against the church that More has grown up in and been a staunch intellectual defender of all of his life, and a very devout man. And More says, he's asked by one of his friends, please sign this, Thomas, at least for fellowship, if nothing else. In other words, join us. And Moore says, if I sign it and that compels me to go to hell, are you going to go along with me for fellowship? And with that, one of his judges says, or one of his inquisitors says, so you think we're all going to hell? And he turns around and he says, I didn't say that. I said, though, that I have to be concerned about my own soul. I am the guardian of my own beliefs. And I have to be concerned about me, and I'm not judging you whatsoever. And so that's the point I'm making. We need protections for the churches because many will not comply with marriages, but that's going to happen. You're going to have these people now barging on the door, banging on the doors of various churches across the country saying, marry me, because they're going to feel emboldened by this ruling from the court. Now, the fact of the matter is, your civil authorities will do that. Your justices of the peace, your county clerks, other people who've been performing these ceremonies for years, because the government says this is now the law of the land and it's constitutional. Because that happens, the government people have to follow along. So you can get a civil ceremony performed in this country, and indeed, in the eyes of the law, you will be married. But you still may not be married in the eyes of, let's say, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Southern Baptist Church, or the Roman Catholic Church. Those churches are simply going to say, well, that's fine, you have a government certificate, but we do not recognize it. So that's the next big battle, is they're going to be knocking down the doors of our churches, and they're going to be demanding that we comply, just as they have done with people who bake cakes, people who bake pizzas, and people who take photographs, forcing them to go against their conscience. Just as you learned when you were young, Lot is approached by a bunch of goons. The angels are in his home, and the goons say, bring them out so we may know them. Well, he doesn't comply, and the angels pretty much took control of that situation. It's coming up on our first break this hour. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 70 as we approach 8:20 this morning, looking for a high, not quite to 100, but although I suppose in some places we could tip that mark. Obviously, the weekend and the next several days is going to be very much a scorcher. We've got more details on that coming up, too, as well. But in the meantime, I do have to check some messages from some of our fine sponsors this morning. We've got more on this subject and many other subjects coming up before we wrap up today. I do hope that you can stick around. And remember, call me on the other side of the break if you have a question or a comment, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. We've been talking about this ruling coming down from the Supreme Court this morning. As I said, I wasn't totally gobsmacked by yesterday's ruling on Obamacare. Definitely not surprised by this one today. I thought this was what was going to happen all along. And same-sex marriage is now legal in all 50 states. And culturally, does it change a whole heck of a lot? I will say this. The American left, which has made this a cornerstone over the last several years, war on same-sex people, war on women, war on children, whatever they've got a war on. They pretty much now, they've come to the end of their quiver with their culture war arguments. They're all done. So now they have to talk about what? Dollars and cents and the future of this economy in this country and the future of our children and grandchildren. They may not be able to do that any longer. Oh, that's right. We're going to be talking about people who think they're men who think they're women and women who think they're men. That's the next battleground. We have a caller with us with Bill Colley this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill.
Yes, sir.
On this subject of gay marriage, I'm a small business owner here in town, and I just don't cater to them. I don't accuse them or blame them for anything. That's what their business is their business. I just don't have time to service them, that's all. I don't put no brand on it. If people just did that, instead of saying, well, I can't cook you a cake because I don't believe in your lifestyle, well, that puts you in jeopardy. If you just tell them you don't have time or that's not in your schedule or whatever, that's the way to avoid that.
I suppose so, and I thank you for the call, although I think you need the Christian cake bakers of this country, because the Muslim cake bakers aren't going to bake them cakes as well. They need en masse to say no. In fact, some people may have to go to jail. That the early martyrs were willing to give up much, much more. So the question becomes, if you are standing up for your beliefs and you really want to make a point and you want to sway public opinion, do what those early martyrs did. You don't have to go quite so far. They won't be devouring you in the arena. But the idea is that you're going to make a point and you're going to show what you're willing to give up for what you believe in. We have another caller with us. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story. It's 71 at 826.
Yeah, Bill, I listen to some of your bumper music, and I know it. And this morning I was listening to REO Speedwagon riding the storm out, and I said to myself, isn't that how it is? Cheating and every philandering and whatever term you want to use that these SOBs do to get what they want. They can't do it in the light of day. They have to cheat, steal, and whatever the hell else you want to call it. And you say to yourself, we got hacked again yesterday, and my heart was broken. And that John Roberts, that gutless, sorry son of a you-know-what.
Yes.
And I said to myself, but we'll fight on. You will not take me from my country, and you won't take the country from me or my family. And I will teach my children, and I will fight, and I will win one day, you sorry bastards. And that's it. I'm done. Thanks.
Hey, thank you much for the call. I posted something from a friend of mine a couple of days ago, a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, on our website where he was talking about some issues today about how, the world is really upside down. He sent out an email this morning, and he basically said the same thing. I mean, he's been retired now for close to 30 years, and yet he's ready to take up arms again if need be. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
So I've been hearing that it's a constitutional right. Okay, so what about the constitutional right then for that freedom of religion? I'm a libertarian. Leave me alone. Let me do my thing. You do your thing. And as long as we're kind people, this is great. But the reason this country is so great is because we can believe how we want. We can say what we want. We can disagree. We can protest. We can do all of these awesome
Well, we
things.
think we can. Can we really actually do it?
Now it's going to be, well, it's my constitutional right to marry the same sex. Okay, great. But then what about my constitutional right? So that's the part where, I don't know, I think that is, to me, that's the scary part, is then, because ultimately, I think it's the freedom of religion that's going to go right out the door. And that is the constitutional right. That was the original constitutional right, is our freedom of religion, to worship and believe how we want. And that part, I'm like you, not surprised at all that this passed. You knew it was going to, and whatever, fine. But when they start throwing around that their constitutional right, then, well, what about us? What about those who choose, and I shouldn't even say us, but what about those who don't believe in that? It's not the government's place to make them do that. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, I guess.
And I thank you much for the call. President Obama is on record saying that sometimes when rights clash, somebody has to lose. And from his perspective, you know who has to lose. I mean, that's, in fact, the American left believes, again, they look at us and they say, you believe in all of this hokum in the Bible or the Quran or the Gita or whatever? Oh, come now. You're a bunch of superstitious fools. No, the scientists have already answered it all for me with their theory of, it's not fact of evolution, by the way, it is still theory, because nobody's witnessed it. But the fact of the matter is they're telling us that we're just a bunch of old fools and we have to give up our superstitions, and if we don't do it willingly, they will force us to do it. 71, another break coming up. Bill Colley with you this morning. More on this topic. Also, terror attacks halfway around the world. Could they be coming here? I don't know. Let's bring 300 or so of the Magic Valley. Hey, a reminder, we're going to see some triple-digit temperatures beginning tomorrow, maybe in some spots today. And by Tuesday, it's supposed to dip down to 99 for the high and then return into the triple digits, which means, of course, your automobile, your home, and your business, all of the windows that you have are going to be working on that convection, heating things up inside. So we recommend Tint Lady. Give them a call or check them out online. They can reduce that heat that's pouring through those windows by nearly 3/4, and that will help you save on overtaxing that air conditioner, and that means lower electric bills. Free estimates, you can call and schedule an appointment at 736-8469 or go to tintlady.idaho.com. Locally owned and operated, 20 years experience plus. Don't squint, get tint. They're located, by the way, at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and of course on Saturdays by appointment, closed Sundays. We're also asking people to join us next week between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. You know, in the middle of all of this heat, we've already had a discussion with the doctors about heat, and as well as, of course, about sleeping issues. You know, it's very difficult to sleep sometimes if you don't have a good AC unit working either. It's much easier to sleep on a cool night than it is on a hot night. And some of those topics we've already covered with Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine here on the program between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We do this every Wednesday. A medical professional, whether it be the doctor, a nurse practitioner, nurse, physician assistant, they come by, they talk about medical issues with us, and they invite your telephone calls too as well. And if you have an issue you'd like to bring up, a medical issue, they'll give their best shot at answering that. And if you drop by the office, you might get a shot too, but that's for another day. So remember, Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, 8:30 to 9 o'clock on Wednesday mornings right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com, a top story with me, Bill Colley, and the good medical professionals as well. They're located across the street from the main post office in Twin Falls on Fillmore Street. Life's too short not to feel good. So there are storm clouds over the Supreme Court right now. Well, Capitol Hill, it's located just across from the plaza at the Capitol in Washington. And I'm not making a figurative comment here. Very dark, ominous clouds over the Supreme Court of the United States today, which has ruled, and it paved the way now. Same-sex marriage will be legal in all 50 states. Doesn't matter what your state legislature says. Doesn't matter what the voters in your state say. Simply because they found nothing in the Constitution that would prohibit it. And remember, the government isn't in the job of prohibiting behavior. The government, the Constitution is there to limit the powers of government. Bill Colley with you on Top Story 71 at 8:36. You're on the air.
Yes.
Good morning.
Yeah, nervous service here.
Yes.
I have an idea. I should probably turn my radio off, I guess.
Well, I don't really hear it, but go ahead.
Okay. Since the Supreme Court isn't doing us any good anymore, I think that they should have to perform gay marriages. And, of course, I'm joking, but I do have one idea that I'm very serious about. I'm not a Mormon, but I would like to see the Mormons and the Catholics and other churches go ballistic on this issue and force the United States government to create a gay marriage performing institution.
In other words, keep it separate.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's the whole. That's going to be the crux of what's coming now. Is how do we protect people of faith from having to be involved in this?
Yeah, from my point of view, this would. I know it sounds like a pretty crazy idea, but I can't think of anything else that would protect churches.
Well, and I thank you for the call. Some of the mainline Protestant churches already are those institutions willing to perform those ceremonies, which is why, of course, no one really goes to those churches any longer. That should be a pretty telling statistic. You're up next with us on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and what's on your mind?
You know, Bill, this gay marriage thing I really don't care about. I just don't like them using the word marriage. I guess we could go back to the good old days when everything happened inside the church, because it's a church or a religious institution, and get the government out of it, and they can suffer not getting their little tax money for every one of the forms. I have a problem with yesterday's one. When the justices are rewriting laws, which is not their job, and interpreting laws to what they feel is not their job. Have you ever served on a jury through the whole trial?
Not fully, no, right.
Okay, so I've done it 3 times, and every time at the end, the judge comes in and says, okay, you've heard all the testimony, now I'm going to tell you how you have to judge this. and he gives you the law and says you cannot use your feelings or anything else. You have to do this by the law. But when the law doesn't do that, does that mean now I can go into court and listen to the deal and rule towards my feelings instead of the law?
Good question, and I thank you for the call, the input. Hard break coming up again in just a moment. You realize if tomorrow all of the people who have traditional views of marriage said we're not going to use the word marriage anymore, we're going to call our unions between men and women, I don't know, pick a word, just say blue. Well, pick a word, blue. Then you'd have the same-sex crowd demanding that they also can have blue. You realize what this is all about is just to make people uncomfortable. It's got nothing really to do with because they could go on with their lives with or without marriage. Well, seems Boise, Idaho has its own similar controversy to the Confederate flag. I happened to see a story this morning on the Associated Press, and then I actually went to the website. The AP got it from KIVI-TV. Went to the website and I actually watched the story. Here's the story, though, from AP, the verbal part of it. The University of Idaho will keep a controversial image inside the old Ada County Courthouse covered for the grand opening of their new campus in July. KIVI-TV reports the mural depicting white settlers lynching a Native American is part of a large painting spread throughout the old courthouse. The University of Idaho, which is leasing out the building as a satellite campus for its law school, has no interest in keeping the mural on display. Now, the mural goes back to the New Deal. Back during the Great Depression, artists were hired to do all of these paintings so that they could take your tax money and go out and work on these boondoggles. But sometimes the work actually was quite good. All that Depression-era art that you see, it always resembles, if you look at it, a lot of what was coming out of the Soviet Union at the same time. Not that I'm making any, implying anything here, but I happen to see the murals. There's several murals on the wall, all pointed by the same artist who was hired in California, brought to Boise to do the paintings in the old courthouse. So these are 80 years old or more now. And he just was trying to do various scenes, from his own imagination about the settling of the state of Idaho and what it looked like at the time. Now, is it possible somebody may have lynched someone who was an Aboriginal or indigenous member of an indigenous tribe here? It's possible, sure. But there's no reports, I think, of anything directly related to that, and no historical record that was the basis for his painting. But the painting doesn't look nice because you see the Indian actually on his knees and he's bound, and they've got the rope around the tree and they're getting ready to string him up and dangle him there. It's not nice. I know that, but here's the thing. It's historical. I mean, it's been there 80-some years. And the guy was just trying to, and yes, there were some clashes between people who had already been living here for millennia and the people who were arriving, by the day. I mean, coming in waves. Of course, there were those types of, and there was a lot of violence that was taking place. We know that from our own history. We didn't whitewash that. I learned that growing up. The associate dean for the college, Lee Dillon, said the mural doesn't fit well with the school and will therefore be kept covered. But former Idaho Attorney General David Leroy says getting rid of the display could cause problems. The building's grand opening will be held July 6th, and classes begin in August. So apparently somebody's sensibilities would be hurt. They'd walk by that just like walking by the Confederate flag and, I'm never going to be able, I've got post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm never going to be able to get on with my life now. I'm going to have to pull up myself into a fetal position. You can feed me anally and then we'll be fine. So what? I mean, nobody's actually being lynched. It's a painting. That's it. And it's a historical painting to top it all off. And the guy is just trying to render some ideas about what life may have been like in Idaho, going back from 1870 through 1895 in that particular range, I suspect. Meanwhile, since we're on this topic, I just was reading today, talking about the Confederate flag. There are people who say that even private citizens shouldn't be able to fly that thing. You're going to have government forced to get rid of it from a great many places. There was a story I saw this morning just before I went on air, and it said that the Gettysburg National Battlefield Museum is considering pulling down a lot of the Confederate iconography. Hello. I mean, there was the greatest battle of the Civil War. Well, there were some other big ones, but the real turning point, I suppose, was that battle and two massive armies colliding. And one of them actually had that flag that is now associated as the Confederate flag, the Army of Northern Virginia. That was the battle standard that they had. And now the museum is going to expunge that part of history. I mean, what are we, nuts? Who rewrites history? Well, the old Soviet Union did it. The Khmer Rouge did it in Cambodia. The North Koreans do it. Why is there this? Well, it might hurt somebody's feelings to come to the museum and see that while they're learning about the battle and the war between the states. Oh, I said war between the states. It should be civil war. Well, yeah, but the point of the matter is this existed. It's like when you watch a movie today and they will show you, these buddy films, but instead of setting them in this day and age, they'll set a buddy film back in like 1870 in the Old West. And they always have to have, we have to have an Asian in the cast and a Latino in the cast, and then we have to have a couple of black people in the cast, and then a couple of white guys in the cast, because that way no one's feelings will be hurt. But it wasn't like a lot of people mixed like that 150, 160 years ago in this country. It didn't happen much. And yet Hollywood always has to say, oh, well, they're all buddies, you see, and they're out for a good time out in the Old West. Well, no. That's not what it looked like. 10 minutes away from the top of the hour, that means 9 o'clock in your language and radio business. We say top of the hour. And, of course, if you're not looking at your watch, you wouldn't know what we were talking about. Wesley Pruden, who's the editor emeritus of the Washington Times. That means he's retired, but he still writes. A native of Little Rock, Arkansas. Here's to getting your ethnic cleansed. He says the South is the new China. Southerners, like the Chinese, revere the past, worship their ancestors and their flags, and eat a lot of rice. William Faulkner observed that the past is not dead because it is not even past. This confuses modern Americans, however, because they don't know much about the past. Yeah, that's why Gettysburg can pull out the flag and remove it and all of those other things, and you would think that they just had a big tea party in the middle of all of those battlefields. The writer says, when Rush Limbaugh observed the other day that what happened to the Confederate battle flag will eventually happen to Old Glory, a lot of people said, well, there goes old Rush again. But he had a point. The American flag has flown over a slave nation much longer than the Confederate flag did. When the firing on Fort Sumter set off the war, there were more slave states in the Union than in the Confederacy. At Appomattox, there were still 4 slave states in the Union. That's because, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation, all that did was free slaves in rebellious states. Although it didn't have much impact until the war was over, but it didn't free slaves in the Union states. It's 8:50. Speaking of that, Rush Limbaugh actually is not the only person who believes this. Here's some remarks from the Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan. WMAL Radio picked this up while he was speaking at a church in Washington.
I don't know what the hell the fight is about over the Confederate flag. We need to put the American flag down because we've cut as much hell under that as the Confederate flag.
If that miserable piece of protoplasm doesn't like living in this country, what we should do is all get together and contribute to buy him a plane ticket, and then he can go wherever the heck he likes. 8:51, you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Well, you were pretty dang close. We'll try another line. 73, going to be a very warm day, up to about 98, 99 degrees, and you're on the air on Top Story.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. How you doing? You kind of changed subjects on me a little bit, but yesterday I called in. I'm the guy that said this thing is just nuts. What's going on? Well, I got to a lady's house yesterday doing my job, and she heard it, and she says, you know, Butch, you're just going to have to get used to this. You're going to have to change with the way the United States is changing. Well, she can stick that idea. You know, I am me. See, that's the thing about a conservative. A conservative, it's not something you choose to be. It's you. You either you are or you're not. A liberal, like some of the Supreme Court justices, are very lazy people. They don't want to have to work for stuff. They want everything given to them. They want things changed so they feel happy, and to hell with the majority of the people. Well, that's where our country's going, and it's like with the gun rights. You know, people say, well, they can't touch the Second Amendment. I'm telling you, the way this is going, if we get 1 or 2 more liberal judges on the Supreme Court, they will overturn the gun rights.
And when someone tells you the country has changed and you've got to get with the program, stop for a moment. What's changed are the institutions. In the old days, when I was a kid growing up, Hollywood was still dominated by the World War II generation, and it was a very conservative community. And then, of course, that all sort of, they had that inversion in the late 60s, and it became a very leftist community. Academia became a very leftist, well, it leaned left, I think, probably more so than most institutions always, but really only over the last 50 years did it become a communist front group. And then you've got a lot of people in government who simply were raised, on all of that Marxist-Leninism. But that does not mean that the average American has changed. While the institutions have changed, the people in those institutions have changed. I think it's a bit of a stretch on their part to say that the majority of Americans, we all want to run out now and engage in gay sex. And gay only means happy, by the way. Maybe we should drop using that Orwellian phrasing and get back to the original scientific term. We all want to go out and engage in that and have a good time with everybody and open our borders and be overrun and give up our faith.
What you're saying, Bill, is exactly right. I can't agree with you more. You look back in the last 4 or 5 years, legalizing marijuana, drugs, the making it to where we want all the kids to be equal, so the best baseball team has to go into the game down 2 points. The gay marriage, the borders, we don't protect our borders like we used to. It's almost like the go back to the Second Amendment. It's almost like I'm doing something wrong for owning guns and for carrying a gun. I see we're the bad guys now, and the way this country is going, it's absolutely sickening to me. Look at religion. Religion is under attack. There is no way. I'm personally Catholic, but there's no way the LDS Church, Catholic Church, Baptist, Pentecost, whatever, should be forced to do gay marriages. Because in the first place, marriage, like you said earlier, is in a church. The government, the only reason they're involved in it is because they want the tax money for the licenses. But let a little kid in school say Christ or God, they get in trouble because of separation of church and state. You can't have it both ways, and that's the way we've got it. They want everybody feeling, talking, acting exactly like they want, like the robots they think we ought to be. And that lady yesterday, she said, well, I'm going to have to change my mind. I've been this way my whole life. I will not change. I'm not perfect, but I am what I am. I believe in doing things right. You don't steal, you don't cheat, you don't hurt somebody unless they have it coming. But this stuff is sitting here saying that we've got to adjust our way of thinking because that's the new progressive. Like I told that lady that she's listening. Oh, she is. She can stick it. I ain't going to do it.
Hey, thank you much for the call. I appreciate that. That's a wonderful outlook on life. You just simply do not comply. You say no. If you think about that, we don't have a lot of jail space really in this country because it's all filled up with all of the people who've come here to deal drugs that we'd like to now make citizens. But oops, we're not supposed to talk that way. Well, I'm just telling you, we have a lot of people in our prison systems who their home countries won't take back. And President Obama has been releasing a lot of them, and then they go out and they commit more crimes while they're on our soil. But you know what? They cannot jail all of us for our refusal to comply. They will try, but after a while, the country will not work any longer. There was a scene in the movie Gandhi. I haven't seen that now in 30 years, but there was a scene in the movie Gandhi where the independence movement is trying to make its point. And so what they simply did is they called a general strike. Now, the British were all sitting around waiting for someone to make their tea for them, get their clothes pressed for them, shine their shoes for them, wipe their bottoms for them, and nobody showed up. And, and the economy in a couple of days dang near collapsed. We have an ability still, and we don't realize it, but out of 330 million people in this country, you don't need many to say, I will not comply. If 10% said, we're not going to comply, things in this country would get mightily out of control for a few days. And that's something that we have to remember, that we still have some power. I mean, we have power in spending. We have power in our jobs, in the services we provide, all of these things. Yes, and at some point, if we would wake up and recognize that, and instead of trying to, because we've been the country's fraying at the seams, everyone is becoming more and more individualistic. Not that there's anything wrong with maintaining your individuality, but Americans aren't joiners much anymore, and while they get angry about things, they usually get angry in front of their TVs or radios in this case, and then that's about it. And, the Tea Party movement surprised me in one sense that there were that many people who were willing to come out and get involved and not always agreeing 100% on everything, but they were there. I mean, that's what impressed me the most about all of that is that it was the first time in my lifetime that I have seen people actually organize for traditional causes in such large numbers. I was in Washington in 2009 for that first march. We had 1.5 million people there. And then I went back the next year for Glenn Beck and the second Tea Party event. Beck had 600,000. I was there in the middle of the crowd. I'll tell you what, you see that, you still have some hope. And the fact of the matter is these institutions may be corrupt, but that doesn't mean the majority of the American people have gotten on that bandwagon. We've got another hour of the program coming up. Hey, coming up in the last half hour, we're going to talk with Anna Workman again about the upcoming Patriots night. Huge event. You got to be there. That's coming up in just after the 9:30 break this morning.